Have you ever wanted to cut your own steaks? And quite honestly, what's the easiest cut to make? Well, that's what we're going to cover today for you. If you can't tell already, the ribeye is my favorite. Let's do this. Coming from the restaurant industry, and the first one I ever worked in, we cut our own steaks. So here you go. This is a 12-pound ribeye lip-on, as they call it, L-I-P-O-N. And you can see that it is it's around $12.59 a pound, I want to say. It was $151 for the whole thing. So excuse me, I'm here in my casual attire. It was actually about 11:30 at night. I was cutting these steaks, but I really like a lip-on like that is actually 11 pounds and under, because it gives you the ability to cut a thicker steak. Obviously, the more they weigh, the taller they are, the more paper thin you have to cut these steaks. So I'm always going to try and cut, I'm cutting these for myself and my wife, so we're going to cut around a 6 to 7 ounce steak, and then I'm also going to cut a couple of 9 ounces as well, just because you like a nice 9 ounce ribeye every once in a while when you go to a restaurant. By the way, look at the price tag on those when you order one as well. Everything's going to be over 25 bucks, I'm sure. But pull this thing out of the cryo pack, and then I toweled it off so that I got all the blood off of it. And then I put it back in the fridge in some just some plastic wrap to let it sit. You always want to cut these cold. Trust me, when this thing starts to get warm, it is a pain to cut to keep that meat straight. You don't want to be cutting diagonal and doorstop shaped steaks. So this one came really trimmed well. So I'm just going to take, not taking any of the fat cap off the top. This is all just coming off the bottom where the rib would be attached. And there's just some silver skin there and a little bit of the thick, gristly pieces that you're going to want to cut off now. And it's easier to do this now, I think, than once you have the steaks cut. And you can always take a look at the bottom of this and see if you have a clean piece of meat. Basically, don't cut all of the fat off, because remember, with a ribeye, fat is flavor. Okay, and we'll get into a little bit about why they call it a ribeye in a minute, but the amount of fat that's on it is adding to the flavor of that steak. Now, I skipped forward just about 2 or 3 minutes, but you can see the very little amount of fat that I actually cut off at the bottom, the rib section of this ribeye loin. And now I'm just going to cut it in half so that I can start cutting steaks out of this, and I'm cutting from the middle back. It doesn't matter. I just find it to be more manageable when I'm only cutting off of a 12-pound, or excuse me, off of a 6-pound piece of meat rather than a 12-pound piece of meat. And I'm going to cut part of the tail off now, because you don't leave the whole tail on a ribeye, and we'll show you trimming instructions here in a minute, but there's very little of this whole loin that I'm not going to use, and that tail piece there is going to become some dog treats for my dogs later. But here I am, and the measurement for this, and I mean, like I said, it's a 12-pound. If it's 11 and down, or just around 12 pounds, one finger, my index finger width, is going to be usually around a 6 to a 7 ounce steak. So that's what I use. And when I'm looking to cut an 8 or a 9 ounce steak, I go 1.5 fingers to 2 fingers. So that's my measurement for you. One finger, and remember, you've got to kind of gauge it. Cut that first one and see where it is. Give it a little way, like I'm doing here. But about an index finger's width on a 12-pound ribeye is going to give you roughly a 6.5 to a 7 ounce steak. And you can see that steak I cut there. I'm going to trim it up here in a minute, but that is the general rule. Okay, so again, you can see here, I'm using the 1 finger measurement. And again, do yourself a favor here. Make sure you've got a very sharp knife, and make sure, and I didn't do this, shame on me, make sure you put a wet cloth underneath your cutting board so that it doesn't slide around on the countertop, because you don't want to lose a digit. You don't want to lose a knuckle. You don't want to be known as Johnny Nine Fingers or anything like that. But when you're trimming these steaks, once you cut your steak, there's literally one cut, and that is to put the tail to a point on the end, and I'll show you that here in a second. The only other cut would be on the rounded end on the back. If there's a big piece of gristle there, you may want to just cut a little sliver of that off, and that's just to make sure that when you're cooking your steak, it doesn't bow up on you. Trimming it, leave the fat cap on, and cut the front end to a point. And on that back end, if there's any gristle right there, just snip it off. But that's the reason they call it a ribeye right there, because there's an eye of fat in it. Remember, fat means flavor. So I'm just going to speed up and skip through this. This is just me cutting more and more steaks out of this. So after we cut all of our steaks, I had 14 6 to 7 ounce ribeyes, and I had 4 9 to 10 ounce ribeyes, and then I'm just literally cutting up the tails off of those two pieces that I cut in half, those big long tails, basically as a 1x1 tail. It's a lot of fat in it, but there's still some meat in it, and you really can't access that meat. But what I can do is I cut it into little slivers, and I cook it up really well done and crispy. That ribeye fat gets nice and crispy, and my dogs love to have those as treats. So there's my stack of ribeyes. You can see I put the shape and the sexiness of my ribeyes up against anybody's. They all look really good. I love the fat content in this meat. Again, ribeye, my favorite steak. I can cut some New York strips, and if you don't want a steak with fat in it, then you want to be cutting a tenderloin into fillets. But these are the best cut of meat as far as I'm concerned. And we're all done, but what I really want to call your attention to is the lack of waste. Like, you can look to the left here. That is it. That is all the waste off a 12-pound ribeye. So hopefully this helped you. If you did, if you could slap a thumbs up on it, and I will have another video out for you soon. Maybe we'll cut a New York strip.